The first SOS message in history, the Titanic. On the night of April 14 to 15, 1912, the Titanic, the most luxurious and advanced ocean liner of its time, struck an iceberg and sank into the freezing waters of the Atlantic. Beyond the tragedy that claimed over 1,500 lives, that night marked a historic moment in maritime communication. For the first time, a distress message was sent using the SOS code, destined to become the universal emergency signal. But how did this historic transmission take place? Why did the message fail to save everyone on board? And what were the last desperate attempts to reach help before the end? The Titanic and communication technology. At the beginning of the 20th century, radio telegraphy was revolutionizing the maritime industry. Launched in 1912, the Titanic was equipped with the most modern communication equipment of the time, provided by the Marconi Company. On board were two radio operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, responsible for handling messages between the ship and the mainland. At that time, radio communications were not used solely for emergencies but also for transmitting private messages from passengers. The Titanic's radio operators spent most of their time sending and receiving telegrams for travelers, often prioritizing these over navigational warnings. This seemingly minor detail proved fatal. Many iceberg warnings from nearby ships were ignored or set aside, considered less urgent than passenger communications. The iceberg and the fatal impact. On the evening of April 14, 1912, the Titanic received multiple iceberg warnings from other ships in the area. However, the crew did not significantly alter course or reduce speed, convinced that the ship was unsinkable. At 11:40 p.m., a massive iceberg emerged from the darkness, and a collision became inevitable. The Titanic's hull was torn open along its right side. The damage was catastrophic, and within hours, the ship was doomed to sink. The first SOS in history. When it became clear that the Titanic was sinking, the radio operators began transmitting distress signals. Up until that time, the most commonly used emergency code was CQD, introduced by the Marconi Company to signal a general distress call. This signal was sent multiple times but received little response. On Harold Bride's suggestion, operator Jack Phillips also began using the newly introduced SOS signal, which had been officially adopted in 1908 but was not yet widely used. The Titanic's distress message read, "CQD CQD SOS Titanic. We are sinking fast. Passengers are being put into boats." It was the first time in history that the SOS code was used in a real emergency situation. The delay in rescue and growing desperation. Despite repeated distress messages, the responses were slow and inadequate. The closest ship, the California, failed to receive the signal because its radio operator had turned off the station for the night. The Carpathia, however, picked up the message and immediately set course for the Titanic, but it was too far away to arrive in time. Meanwhile, panic spread aboard the Titanic. The lifeboats were insufficient for all passengers, and many were launched half empty. As the ship continued sinking, Phillips and Bride remained at their posts, desperately transmitting until the very last moment. At 2:17 a.m., the radio room was swallowed by water, and transmissions ceased forever. Minutes later, the Titanic broke in half and disappeared beneath the ocean. The impact on maritime safety. The Titanic disaster led to a major overhaul of maritime safety regulations. In 1914, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, was established, imposing stricter rules on onboard radio communications and requiring radio operators to remain on duty 24 hours a day. The SOS signal was officially adopted as the universal distress call due to its simplicity and recognizability. Since then, it has been used in countless emergencies, saving lives at sea and on land. Conclusion: the first SOS message in history did not save the Titanic, but it marked a turning point in maritime safety. The tragedy pushed the world to improve maritime communications, preventing future disasters. Today, the legacy of that night lives on in modern rescue technologies and the understanding that swift communication can mean the difference between life and death. The Titanic still rests at the bottom of the Atlantic, a silent monument to what happened that night. But its final signal, its cry for help, continues to resonate in history, reminding us how fragile human existence is against the power of nature.